Welcome to the Game Changing Work Show. Today, it's all about survival to strategy. And so we're gonna touch on the employee experience, which is quite a hot topic out there today. And we're realizing it's not just an HR problem now. And so we're gonna get into some three top challenges that leaders are facing, which we're going to touch on the new era of employee engagement. We're going to talk about also, as I got to look at my notes, develop and retaining talent. And then lastly, it's going to be about workplace flexibility. So, those of you that are experiencing this today or interested in this topic, come join us as we're about to get started. And so, I'm going to pass the baton to Roxana to introduce our very special guest today.
And absolutely happy to do that. As you can see, we have a super special guest, Mitch Goldstein, who's an experienced technical and organizational agile coach. He has more than 30 years experience in the software development industry and working with agile principles and teams since they came into common use. So good to have that experience in. Mitch is also right now an enterprise agile strategist for Box and the premier cloud content management company, a pioneer of object oriented development and Java user interface, Swing development. He has spent years honing his craft as a consultant for investment, accounting, insurance, and healthcare organizations. He's also a published author and technical journalist, and he has transitioned from architecture and development to being a seasoned agile coach focused on creating high performance teams and improving enterprise organizations. It's amazing to have you here, Mitch. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for asking me to come on. I'm really happy to be here, Roxana and Veronica. I love your show, and it's an honor to be part of it.
I just love now, like I was saying, you're on the other side now. As you used to stop in and say hello to us, we finally got you to come over here and actually have a conversation with us today. And I'm excited about this topic because one, it's an important topic, and it's no longer like I was mentioning an HR thing. And so as we dive into so it's very interesting about our different perspectives where we come from. I know Mitch, you and I, we have an agile background. We've both been consultants. I'm still in that world where you've joined Box and trying to help them more specifically, right? And then Roxana with your team-based leadership and working with leaders in your programs. So as we dive through today, those of you that are joining us, we're going to take these topics, we're going to go through and see what each of these perspectives that we have around that. So our first one today is going to be on the new era of employee engagement. Now, I didn't know if you were going to lead this question for Mitch, Roxana. I didn't know if you wanted to take it away.
Yeah, sure. Because I love that. And I love this first question in the first place. And because we're talking about this new era of employee engagement, the question that we have for you, Mitch, right now is what is it that we can do differently or maybe more than before in this new era? And what are you doing right now at Box?
A super great question, Roxana. It is definitely a new world. Box as a company started out as a startup company in Redwood City. It's now a Fortune 100, I believe, company. And we've had to think all along the history of the company of how to change with whatever comes our way. The last 2 years have been extremely interesting and have really been a crucible where we've been forced to come up with new and innovative ways to work together. Uh, I'm happy to say that I really enjoy working at Box, although the world changing in the sense I've only met physically one of my many hundreds of coworkers. So naturally, we're in a situation where we have to think of different ways of engaging with employees. The last 2 years have seen, there's little doubt about it, the biggest shift in employment in the IT industry since its inception. When I first came into IT, A typical career was 2.5 years before moving on. Slowly, that went down to 18 months, and now we're hovering somewhere around the 10 or 11-month tenure at a company before we move on. So all these factors have made it very, very tricky to come up with one silver bullet to solve the employee engagement problem.
Yeah.
Veronica,
It's
I see
definitely
you. I see
being a
you there.
startup, right? It's probably easier to adapt in a sense because of a startup mindset, but just as challenging as what everyone is facing today.
Yeah, and to me, that's why agility is so important for us. My philosophy about agility is that it's not what you do, and it's not really how you do it. It's how you think about your work,
Yeah.
and focusing on being an individual who's a learner and an adapter on a team of learners and adapters in an organization of learners and adapters. And all we can do is just wait for the next thing to come our way. I think Box, in a way, are very fortunate. We're very, very well positioned to have tools that people need in order to achieve the type of engagement we need to survive. And we haven't really seen, there was a lot of doom and gloom that predicting that companies would not be able to keep it together. But fortunately, due to the cloud global tools that we can use to work together, we've managed to survive despite never be thinking we would be in this situation. One has to wonder what are things going to be like 2 years from now? What's going to come our way that's going to be the next game changer?
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, I
So
think
I'm thinking also, what's life going to be like when some of us are remote, like I will be remote, and some of us are not remote. And I think that time is coming where people will start moving back to the old office paradigm. And then people like myself and many of my colleagues who are hired to be remote employees, we're still going to have to engage with people who are no longer remote. And I think that's going to be the next really interesting challenge, to keep that playing field level between people who are together and on the job and at the office, and people who are literally spread all over the world.
yeah, and that makes a lot of sense if you think about, because you said it's how we think about work, and I think it connects directly to that. It's that shift in how we think about it.
Right.
That's going to maybe solve a lot of these issues, and I don't know, maybe stem some other issues. We don't know yet, right? I think this is the big
I
question
think the
mark.
challenge is that Agile, Scrum, a lot of the disciplines that we're familiar with are predicated on co-located teams. The
Yeah.
idea of like the Scrum way of work, it's presumes that the team is co-located. The Agile Manifesto was written long before anybody would conceive that we would be having a conversation like this.
Yep.
And I always throw back and I say, if this pandemic would have occurred in, say, 2003, how would we have handled it? What would we be doing? Sending emails to each other? I mean, that was pretty much all we had. We didn't have the type of, the ability to communicate globally that we do. So thank heavens, I wouldn't say the pandemic couldn't have come at a better time, but it could have come at a time where it would have been much more impactful on the way we work. So we're very fortunate to have Box and other companies that provide global collaboration tools, so that we can have that feeling of co-location, even though we may be spread over literally the entire earth.
Yeah, I think for working throughout this whole time and even before, and you can probably relate to some of the things that I say, Mitch, working in agile engagements, we always had to deal with a global conundrum and problem about how do we collaborate in these agile events and so forth. But it was always a challenge sometimes because they didn't necessarily have the infrastructure to always support what we were talking about, right? That next best thing if people aren't physically in the room, and how they communicate and collaborate beyond that. So it was always there when it came to the different locations that people had to work with. What has happened now it's gone exponentially, and almost put it like in the pressure cooker, where the last couple of engagements, when we talk about the employee's experience, it's become not an HR thing in this conversation. It's always now been about what are we doing to our people, and it kind of relates to some of the other topics that we're about to jump into. That now the metrics isn't necessarily these agile metrics or how do we bring value metrics of what the business cares about, right? Now they're actually putting in the people metrics, because all of my conversations that have been happening, and I just got off a call today about people being the engine, and part of their OKRs are all about making sure they have metrics that incorporate that. So it's high on every leader's mind. How do we do that to make sure that, we always did it on a change management perspective of ensuring that there's buy-in to change, but now I don't have to convince anyone anymore. I'm almost at a euphoric stage in truth, because I was always about the people part, right? When it comes to change and what we do and put that in the front, and you had to almost have to sell it sometimes because you were brought in for process.
Right.
It's not an issue anymore. And the tables have turned where it's everybody's problem now. And that's what I meant, like when we started this talk today, it's now become everyone's problem, because now the employee's experience is everybody's experience. And now we have to figure it out together, because everything we do, from how do we work hybrid, the tools that we use, the processes that we do, our strategies that we're putting in place are highly people-centric today. And if we don't consider it, this is where the balls will drop, because we're still in a state of flux. We don't know what's about to happen. And if you don't have that at your core of how you're measuring, how you're planning, how you're strategizing, you're just going to hit that cycle all over again, and loop of what happened when the pandemic hit. And you're going to be in a state of fury, like, oh my God, of chaos. How do we handle our people? Because it's not up front and center. And that's what I love about what's happening in all the engagements I'm in. It's not a hard conversation to have anymore like it used to be.
Yeah,
I agree.
totally.
Another interesting aspect that we kind of neglect, we want to have a diverse, inclusive workforce.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why we reach out into other global cultural areas and build workforces that are remote. At Box, we have remote workforces in Europe, and it's a very, very interesting challenge. Box is headquartered in Redwood City, California, in the Pacific time zone. Our Warsaw office is located in Eastern Europe, and they're 9 hours ahead. So this makes for some interesting logistics. How do we have teams that are a shift off, a shift plus an hour off of their work time? How do we keep them coordinated? And I think that we've learned, I want to say learned the hard way, but we really kind of have learned the hard way how to keep teams together. But there's a problem. Just like the Agile Manifesto and the Scrum Guide were kind of written from the privileged standpoint of co-located teams, they're also written from the privileged standpoint of American culture. And
Correct.
that to go into a culture from other places and say, okay, you guys are going to be a self-organizing team. That doesn't fly everywhere. That's not baked into every culture to not, be told what to do. So we end up kind of saying that we have to tailor our message very cautiously everywhere we tell it for the culture that we're targeting.
Mm-hmm. I love that, because I remember back in my corporate days, we were working like that. We had offices on 2 continents. So, and that cultural aspect that you mentioned, that is so crucial. And especially right now, I think when we talk about, you said that, Agile was invented before we started to work like this in more in the virtual space, maybe not even hybrid, but fully virtual. And how do you do that? The corporate world is the same. I mean, even if they had offices internationally, they still had local teams in each of the countries, in each of the cities,
Right.
who were supposed to go there to the office, get to work, because otherwise, how are we going to measure work? How are we going to know that people actually do the thing? And now it's not like that anymore, and we're going through this transition where we don't understand, okay, how can we still measure that? How can we end in a way that still keeps people engaged and motivated? And I think the cultural aspect is more, it's starting to be less related to the country culture, but more to the company culture. And I think this is where companies are trying to get their heads together, because from what I've seen, in my work with the teams, a lot of the people say, I love the culture of my organization. I just miss feeling it because of the fact that I work fully virtually and I don't get that in-person interaction, which still some people miss. And it's gonna happen for a while, and we just maybe need to acknowledge it and see what we do with it, because it affects the way that people feel about the culture. Even if they love it, they
Yeah.
miss it.
Those of you that are watching right now, we have a couple of people that are live. Welcome from watching our session today. If this resonates with you, put it in the comments. Let us know, what are some challenges that you're experiencing today? Are you seeing what we're saying, right? Or experiencing it yourself? We'd love to know. Now, we have Gabby. Hi, Gabby. Gabby mentioned here where she'd be interested to know what the box approach to terms of employee progression and development when on a remote basis. Mitch, did you want to share before we get into that next topic?
Sure, real quick. Box's approach, really, we've tried to maintain the same connection with sort of like the human connection that goes into our annual review process and the promotion process. I think it has already been pretty successful, and I think it translated very, very well because of the way that we connect to each other within the organization and the way that we elicit and use feedback. I think was actually very conducive. Now we're facing a situation where an even larger percentage of the organization is going to be remote, so we are going to still have to tailor our processes. But as far as I can tell, the progression and promotion processes haven't really changed very much. I'm still seeing very, very good upward and lateral mobility at Box. Lateral mobility is something we encourage a lot at Box. It's another way of delivering cross functionality across the organization, is by having people move around through the organization and progress vertically and kind of horizontally at the same time. I call it diagonally.
And Gabriella, you hit on our next topic, which is a nice progression into developing and retaining talent. And just to kind of expand on what you're talking about, since we're on this subject, what have you seen? I guess from what you know when you've been there and talking to people, and maybe what's planned is change in the last 2 years when it comes to developing and retaining talent. Is the landscape starting, is there a rethink about it?
That's another excellent question, and I think Box has. It's hard for me to tell whether Box has been more or less of a victim of what I like to call the great IT musical chairs of 2021, 2022. I think that we have been impacted. I think every organization has been impacted. Humongous organizations naturally will have been impacted a little less than medium or medium large size organizations. But I think what we have to do is we can no longer bank that the people who we respect and like and have been around a long time, that they're going to be there. And we have to build sufficient contingency into our strategic plans and also our tactical plans that have baked in this notion that our organization is liable to change and is unstable. We would love to have a stable organization, but once again, I think that's a very privileged position. We want to say, oh, well, why would anybody want to leave Box? And it turns out there's lots of reasons that people want to leave. Many of them have nothing to do with Box. And I think that it's been a little difficult for us to digest. We've really taken the situation, and I think we've done as well as any other company. We have stepped up our number of recruiters, our recruiting efforts. We're trying to tighten up our process, get our onboarding together, and really just try to make it as good an experience as any. But what do you do when you ask somebody, you say, well, why did you leave Box? And like, well, I don't know. I just left because someone made me an offer I couldn't refuse. It was an opportunity to work in a different environment, in a different place. I did it. I left Accenture after a fairly lengthy tenure, and it was really just because I was tired of consulting remotely, and I wanted to try something different. And I'm sure that that's the same mentality. We tend to get into a kind of a lockdown, artificial lockdown mode, and we have to wonder to ourselves, what are our commitments to our employers? What does that even mean? How long are we expected or required to stay? If we're not happy, are we required to stay at all? And I think employers are going to have to reevaluate and rethink this if they want to stabilize their workforces.
Yeah, definitely. So we had another comment, and this one is for Roxana, from Jason, about the percentage that you were talking about people feeling, experiencing. Do you want to elaborate on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And what I've seen is, first of all, I work with teams and leaders together. So the teams where this concern has been expressed, they said that in the context of the leaders bringing that team together, reevaluating their vision and values, and talking about the stuff that they need to talk about. And what I heard leaders say is, well, we never did this before with our teams because we didn't feel we had to, and now it's a must. And back to your point, Veronica, where it's like everything is people based right now, because individuals are more people based right now. So it's always, whenever the discussion in a team comes to, I miss feeling the company culture, it's always because that leader created the environment where the team could express that. Otherwise, you won't hear it in a team environment. You will just hear individuals maybe complaining, and that's different. And that's what you don't want to have.
And then expanding on talking about your conversations with these leaders and them, thinking about their teams, what have you learned when it came to developing and retaining talent? Like, what's on their minds right now that they share with you?
There's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of getting back to the drawing table and figuring things out. And I think a lot of them are learning that they don't have to isolate themselves as leaders anymore. And I see that especially with mid to senior managers or team leaders. They understand that it's crucial for them as leaders to be able to get the data that they need from their teams and work with their teams so that they actually can move forward together, because otherwise the gap widens between the leader and the team. And wherever we want to move, it's not going to work because we're going to move in different directions. So what I see is a lot of team discussions around what our mission is, what our values are, what our vision is right now, and what is the culture that we want to keep building, and how are we going to do that?
Yeah, and for me, it's ditto from what you said, but just to kind of expand as we close up this topic. What I have a lot of conversations, because we're obviously in the crux of change and trying to think of new ways of thinking and working. There's new roles and new things that people have to do, and so if I channel with agility or lean, there's always these new responsibilities that might come up, and the key thing that always ends up happening is who should be doing these things. We don't have anyone right now specifically designed for this. And so part of that developing and retaining talent's always been a puzzle for a lot of leaders out there, even before this. But the hyper focus, the pause, and wanting to actually solve for it a little bit more. I guess it's not that they didn't care, but now I think it's there's a lot more pressure to actually deal with it, of making sure people are happy. Being a scrum master, for example, right? That voluntold that I deal with, right? And making sure that, do they really like being one now? And what does it mean like, and are they fulfilled, and how can we help them, and what does it mean to develop in this role as a career path? They actually are now taking a lot of those conversations more in the beginning and not waiting for it to become an issue, right? They're a lot more proactive about it, because it's exactly about the employee experience and what's happening out there today. So again, it's in everybody's problem. It's not they're not reactive anymore. They're more proactive in my conversations. That's the difference that I'm seeing right now, is that less reactive and more proactive, because they know it's coming. They know it's going to come up, right? And so that makes the conversations a little bit easier for someone, for me, coming in, talking about change and talking about new responsibilities and roles that need to happen in order to make these things successful. So that's kind of where I come from on that. Now we have another one as we wrap up our topics, and this is a hot one and very kind of interesting, where you're going to go, Mitch, with this, about workplace flexibility and expectations. And so where do you let me ask it a little differently, is what has Box done to deal with this expectation, right? You said, some people are going to go back to the office, you work remote. What is there choice? What does this look like at Box?
Yeah, I think that we have offered that a choice. I believe that we're getting into a subtle piece of business about compensation by location. Okay. For example, if before the remote days, if they wanted me to come out to work for Box, they would have had to pay me a lot of money to move myself and my family to one of the highest real estate areas in the country. And either that or have a lengthy commute from somewhere out in the sticks. That's not for me. I like being able to come downstairs, like walk down a flight of stairs, such as my office is, and it's the place where I do my work. I don't have to go anywhere. I can't believe how much I like that when it's given as a choice. Now, what we're going to do is Box will, for example, for me, I know I'll probably be visiting California 3 or 4 times a year and spend some time out there so I can get to know people, do some in-person, face-to-face, body-to-body, actual in the same room, maskless coaching someday. It has been an awful, awful long time. But I think it's going to work. If this works right now, there's no reason why a hybrid. But now think about it. We're all 3 individually in 3 different places. What would the dynamic be like if Veronica and Roxana, if you were together and I was in a different place? Is it going to be the same dynamic, or is it going to be different? I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's going to be a different dynamic. So we're going to have
for
to figure
sure
out how to compensate, for, someone sitting next to you in the room. You can hear them breathe. You can feel their body heat versus someone who appears in a 1-inch by 2.5-inch section of your screen. Do we treat people with the same type of empathy and humanity when we see them on a screen? I think it really remains for us to discover that.
Yeah. And Roxana, we had a guest that talked about the 4-day work week, and just kind of curious, like, knowing we know that, and some of the conversations that you've had with leaders, what say you on just the whole flexibility in general, right? We're talking about time and location.
Oh,
and
yeah,
what you do.
exactly. Time, location, and even, choices when it comes to what are my choices in the company, for example. Where do I go from where I am today, and how can I grow? That's a lot of, maybe a little bit more flexibility as well, as we start to work more in this kind of networked way. But it's funny, because what I was thinking about is at the beginning of the pandemic, and that kind of goes back to Jason's question as well. A lot of people wanted to get back to normal, business as usual, and they couldn't wait for the moment where we would get back into the office. It was like, oh my God, I need to go to the office. And now the stats, if you look at all of the stats out there, more than like around 60-70% of people, they don't want to go back to the office, or at least they don't want to go a 9 to 5 days a week. There's no way, and especially with the younger generations, there's no way this is going to happen. So there is, what I think as well is that everybody kind of realized, and not just leaders, but everybody knows, and even leaders, they don't want to do that. They really like this kind of way of working. So nobody really wants to get back. And we're trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with it? Because it is going to be, we are impacted by our own biases, which, by the way, are going to be there no matter what, whether we like it or not, whether we're aware of them or not, because a lot of them are subconscious, right? So yes, is it going to affect me? Is it going to affect my relationship with somebody that I work with virtually versus somebody that I work with in person? Absolutely. It's more about finding out how that virtual work affects me, what my biases are, how I'm perceiving people differently, and how I can work with them differently to make things work. So I'm interested in knowing your opinion about that, Veronica.
Well, I definitely have my biased opinion, but what I'm noticing out there and a lot of the clients, it's almost like a multi-dimensional thing when it comes to flexibility. Everyone has different times of the day that they feel they're most effective and productive. And so you're either a morning person, a evening person, or what might have you. So the conversations are not only about where I'm working, but when I work. And so what starts to end up happening, and I just had this conversation today about time as a precious asset. You know, I say that all the time, right? Once time goes, it's gone. And so when we talk about workplace flexibility, it has everything to do with time. Time on what you're doing with your family, your loved ones, time commuting to work, or just the time when you prefer to actually work. And so this is where, of course, me being in the agility like side, and of course you could probably attest to this, and that thinking is, if we work smarter and we think smarter, right? And so we're intelligently thinking and acting, we can get our time back and be more effective. What do I mean by this? So here's the conversations I've just had today is, okay, when people are complaining too many meetings, I don't have time to learn and do all these things. My first inclination is, well, what are you doing to change that paradigm? Are we working smarter? Are we working, are we changing some of that? Right. And so it's starting to, all the things us, the Agilists, have been saying, hey, when we talk about productivity and effectiveness, the 4-day work week, working different hours, I can go run down the gambit, where you are, whatever, becomes a conversation you can put on the table. Right. Because if we're actually doing the right things at the right time, driving business results, and everyone feels confident that we are doing the best that we can, and we can actually show it through metrics, right? Then and adapt to what's happening, what's not happening, right? Because if we're a learning culture, that's what we do with those, measure the right things, right? Measure what matters. That whole workplace flexibility becomes an option no matter what your bias is. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we really, really should take heart to that. And so now, hey, another thing I'm going to put on the table, I can actually have these conversations with leaders because the people part is high on their radar. This was a very hard sell sometimes. I always had to spin it to dollars only. Like dollars and speed to market. Those were like the only two things that would perk their ears and they cared about most of the time. Now I can actually talk about the employee experience because it's not the be lucky you have a job, Joe. No, it's not that anymore. Because guess what? Yeah, be lucky they're staying there. I just had a conversation with my accountant, bless her soul. She talks about, like, she's one of those that she's like, oh, if you would have ever had me think I was going to work from home and do all this, I would have told you. Like, she had her little saying, and she goes, but my 20-year-old son though is another thing, because she, at one hand, accountant, doesn't really probably do a lot of change, right? It's in her nature. Accountants don't do a lot of change, right? Their change rate is probably long. Her son though is 21 years old. You know where I'm going with this, Roxana. His change rate is about a 1 to 2 year. We're realizing that in the millennial generation, Roxana and I, we talk about these statistics all the time. And then you got the Gen Z coming at the heels, coming into the workforce, right? So millennials, think about, they're about 40. So there are a lot of the leaders that are coming in now. And then you have the Gen Z, which are coming out of college, right? And those are those ones, coming in the workforce. So those of you that aren't sure about the generations. And what we're learning is their change rate and their tolerance level is short and low. And so now this whole conversation I said about workplace flexibility, yeah, you're better. It's not an HR problem anymore.
Right.
Not an HR problem anymore.
And I want to build on that a little bit, because I know that there are some people out there who are going to think, yeah, employees, but we have a business to run. And I say, yes, but like workplace flexibility, when it comes to employee engagement, that means customer engagement as well. Because that is going to directly reflect on how you work with your customers. And a lot of organizations out there realize, hey, if we work in a hybrid model, we can serve our clients in a hybrid model, and we can actually serve more people and better, which is going to reflect on our business results. So it's not, how we tend to separate the people from the business as a whole. No way. That's going to impact the way that your people work. That's going to impact the way that your clients are going to perceive you.
Yeah, right, Mitch. People, strategy, and process. You have to connect it all.
And I think it's going to be very interesting to see over the next few years what other sacred cows are going to be eliminated, right? Right now, the sacred cow was, and I don't mean that in any sort of insulting way, but the sacred cow was everybody had to be in the same place. Everybody had to physically be there for a stand up every day. Now that sacred cow is gone, what's going to be next? Is the 40-hour work week next? Is the 5-hour work day next? Is the idea that you're supposed to show up at any particular time and leave at any particular time? Is that the next sacred cow? Is talking about salaries? Is that the next sacred cow? Ask me why I asked that, because we're doing business with many cultures and countries. I'll give you Poland for an example, where salaries are by law public. Compensation is public. How do we integrate with a group of people who must have a public salary and another group of people, the majority of which have a confidential compensation? So
yeah, that's a good point.
To say, what's the next sacred cow that's going to fall? I've seen in my time, not trying to brag, I remember a time where it was white men in one air conditioned room in a building, and that was the IT department. And now it's absolutely, you wouldn't even know it was the same business process. And I like it much better this way. I think we can work better this way. I think the more human we make our work, the more we make our work fit our lives, and not vice versa, the happier we are.
Life, work, balance. And I love, that's kind of our theme about this all is it's life, work, balance. And it's being smart and good business smart. So everything we're talking about isn't this touchy-feely, people only. No. We're talking good business just in general.
And I ask people all the time, what's the most valuable thing that we have at Box? Is it our source code? Well, I mean, that's clearly valuable. Our products are, we're doing okay. But no, it's the information that's locked up in Boxers' heads. That's the most valuable commodity that we have. Every talented, skilled person who leaves with everything in their head. If they didn't write it down, they didn't share it, it walks out the door with them, and it will probably never be seen again. And I think that leadership have got to start thinking more along that way than the dynastic, the privileged dynastic view that we have an organization and it will remain mostly the same. And Perhaps some details will change, some people will come and go, but the organization itself, and then flip that on its head and say, no, the organization isn't just there. It's the people who make the organization. When the people change, the organization necessarily changes. And we have to stop being in that ivory tower situation where we say, oh, well, this is the place and everywhere else is not the place. That we have to dispense with that thinking.
Yeah,
we
and
have to have you. You have to have you back, Mitch, in about 6 months so that we can see what's happening in the meantime.
Well, speaking of time, we're gonna have to wrap up here. But I'm going to be a little fortune cookie here, and Mitch is going to come back when we have another good hot topic, because we've been talking about some saucy things here. And speaking of organization, leadership, and energy, we have a webinar. We had a Quanta here. What was it, 2 weeks ago? I can't even keep track anymore. But we have a webinar where we're going to do a deep dive on the black box method, which is all about organizational energy, leadership energy, and what, if any of you guys ever read The Fifth Discipline and really talking about that rubber band effect, you're optimized for a certain amount, but what happens when you're not, and what do you do about it? And so there's a direct correlation to physics and science about this, folks. And if you're interested in learning more about this black box method, February 23rd, we're going to drop the link in the chats for all those, but they're at LinkedIn, folks, on the platform, which is our main platform. We'll have this in the comments there for you as well. Come register. It's a free webinar. It's going to be interactive. You can ask your questions. So come on. It will be February 23rd at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time, and 5 o'clock GMT. How did I memorize that? I have no idea. Too many posts on LinkedIn, I think. So those of you, thank you so much for coming. Again, Mitch, you're a delight. You're a delight.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I always try to catch you guys. You guys always have amazingly lively, thoughtful, very human, very, very emotional conversations about things. I'm always happy to be a part of everything you guys do. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
Thank you. You just made our show just more enriching by just being here and supporting us. And you are going to come back, because I I see you. Bye, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's segment.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.